Hello everyone, you have come to Tata Comic Preview channel. Let read together. Have fun. Duanmu Shang was competitive by nature. His desire to win was much greater than Yu Shanghai or Yu Shangrong. Yu Shangrong's words, naturally, provoked him. He bellowed angrily as he gripped the Overlord spear with both hands, pushed away from the ground, and leaped into the air. His Overlord spear seemed alive as he swung it around. It was an impressive sight to behold. Yu Shangrong dodged and retreated. Swoosh. 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 The spear's tip consistently fell short of half an inch before it reached Yu Shangrong. Duanmu Shang swung the Overlord spear ferociously. Spear shadows began to appear. The others exclaimed in surprise. Duanmu Shang was capable of wielding the Overlord spear at such a speed with just his strength alone. He had improved greatly from his training under the water. The others were filled with nothing but praise for him. The Overlord spear moved even faster. Its afterimages began to overlap. Hua Wudao nodded. This is the Scorching Field 100 strikes of the Overlord spear's Divine One technique. 100 spear shadows can be conjured up in one go. If he were to use it with his primal chi, he could pierce a 4 script 6 compatible seal. As expected of Elder Hua. You're truly knowledgeable. I've been enlightened. Hua Wudao was discomfited by these words. How could he not be knowledgeable in regard to this? He had lost count of the times he had witnessed the Scorching Field 100 strikes in action. For a time, he even dreamed about the thrusting shadows of the Overlord spear while he was sleeping. In the end, he said, the next move after the Scorching Field 100 strikes is the 1,000 waves. It seems like Duanmu Shang's opponent is slightly underestimating him. The 1,000 waves? As soon as Hua Wudao's voice faded, the Overlord spear's 100 spear shadows vanished. Duanmu Shang leaped up and conjured the spear shadows in the air. The others were still under the assumption that Yu Shangrong would pay for underestimating his opponent when he smiled and swung his longevity sword. Whoosh. 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 With a faster speed, more extreme movements, and more outrageous sword shadows, Yu Shangrong responded in kind. Boom. 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 A thunderous noise reverberated in the air as the two heaven-grade weapons collided. Sparks flew everywhere. Every swing of the sword parried the Overlord spear. Every strike of the sword was precise and flawless. Bam. The final sword stroke was from the bottom. It met the Overlord spear's tip in a slashing motion. The 1,000 waves was repelled before it was completed. Duanmu Shang did a somersault in midair. When his feet touched the ground, he slid back from the momentum. After taking dozens of steps backward, he crashed against the stone wall with a bang. Rubble fell from the natural formation. Both opponents stopped attacking. These were two of Duanmu Shang's most powerful moves. However, they were unimaginably fragile before Shangrong. Duanmu Shang found this difficult to accept. Those who witnessed this scene were silent. They were shocked by Yu Shangrong's seemingly simple move. This was especially true for Pan Litian, Lang Luo, and Hua Wudao. The common folk would focus on fanfare while the professionals would notice the skill. They could tell how skilled with the sword Yu Shangrong. Duanmu Shang gripped his Overlord spear, unwilling to give up. He looked at Yu Shangrong, who wore an indifferent expression on the face and was filled with the urge to charge at him again. Yu Shangrong said, "Give up." He turned around and returned his longevity sword to its scabbard. Then, he added, "This is meaningless." How is this meaningless? Duanmu Shang was puzzled. If he had to yield every time he met an expert, how was he supposed to improve? Yu Shangrong smiled faintly without explaining himself. Instead, he looked at the audience. Was there not even a single person who could see what was going on here? Was there no one who would step forward to dissuade this blockhead? Finally, Hua Wudao said, "Duanmu Shang, that's enough. You think that I can't beat second senior brother as well, Elder Hua?" Duanmu Shang asked unhappily. Hua Wudao coughed twice before he replied, "Whether it's sword or spear skills, all of Mr. Second's skills were meant to kill. They had been tempered through battles of life and death. Without sufficient tempering and experience, you won't be able to defeat Mr. Second no matter how long you train under the waterfall. The experience of brushing shoulders with death was not something that could be obtained from classes or debates. Lang Luo nodded and said, "That's true." Pan Litian chimed in as well, "I agree." The others looked at the old men from the old age pavilion skeptically. Usually, these old men would address the disciples by their names. However, they addressed Yu Shangrong as Mr. Second. Was this not discrimination? Duanmu Sheng scoffed and said, "I wouldn't bet on it." He suddenly raised his spear domineeringly and launched an even more intense attack. The others exclaimed with surprise. They did not expect Duanmu Sheng to attack so suddenly. Yu Shangrong smiled faintly. He turned to the side slightly and softly said, "Too slow." The spear's thrusts were dizzyingly fast. The others felt lightheaded as they tried to follow the spear's movements. Swoosh! Swoosh! The Overlord's spear stirred up a cloud of dust. Lift! Yu Shangrong raised his arm. He did not retreat. Instead, he suddenly lunged forward. Duanmu Sheng had no choice but to retreat. Otherwise, the Overlord's spear would be too long for it to have any use. The moment Duanmu Sheng moved back, Yu Shangrong moved closer at a much faster speed compared to Duanmu Sheng. Duanmu Sheng retreated again. Swoosh! Duanmu Sheng lifted his spear and pointed it in the air as he swung his arm. Not bad. Alas, you're too slow. Yu Shangrong was already by Duanmu Sheng's side. The others shook their heads and sighed helplessly. This was the difference between the heavens and the earth. Just when the others thought that Duanmu Sheng was about to be defeated, he erupted with primal qi. Boom! The primal qi rippled into the surroundings. Yu Shangrong's cultivation base had been sealed. The impact landed on him squarely, causing him to reel back like a fired projectile. Whoosh! Yu Shangrong appeared calm, but his qi and blood were surging. Pure skill was what made him seem less battered than he actually was. In fact, he seemed confident and at ease even when he was sent flying back. Ding! Punished Yu Shangrong. Reward, 300 merit points. The entire scene had fallen silent. Clearly, Duanmu Sheng had broken the rules. He had used primal qi. At this moment, Duanmu Sheng seemed to have withered. He had lost the will to continue fighting. He was utterly ashamed of himself. Even when he used his primal qi, he still could not defeat Yu Shangrong. All he managed to do was to send Yu Shangrong flying back. What more could he say? The weak would only find excuses for themselves. The atmosphere was slightly tense. No one knew how this would end. After a moment's silence, Duanmu Sheng walked up to Yu Shangrong and bowed respectfully. "Second senior brother, I've been rude." "It's a trivial matter," Yu Shangrong said. He did not hold this against Duanmu Sheng. The others felt helpless. If Duanmu Sheng could not defeat Yu Shangrong, then the others definitely did not stand a chance. At this moment, a voice laced with skepticism rang from behind the crowd. "Is that your so-called sword path?" The crowd parted. They retreated and bowed. Pavilion Master. Old Senior. Lu Zhou walked over with his hands on his back as he swept his gaze across everyone. Then, he walked up to his two disciples. Duanmu Sheng's face fell. He fell to his knees immediately and said, "Master, I've made a mistake. I was only trying to spar with second senior brother." Yu Shangrong wore an arrogant expression on his face and remained silent. In the cave of reflection, Zhu Honggong kneeled and greeted Lu Zhou. "Greetings, Master. Thanks to your instructions, I had a stroke of luck and entered the nascent divinity tribulation realm. I now have 100 tribulations insight avatar." Lu Zhou glanced at Zhu Honggong. That news surprised him. Within 3 months, not only did Zhu Honggong manage to quell the rampaging energy in his body, but he had also entered the nascent divinity tribulation realm. That was no small feat. He casually waved his hand, and the barrier vanished, indicating Zhu Honggong was free to leave the cave of reflection. Zhu Honggong was overjoyed. He cowed out and said, "Thank you, master. You're truly magnanimous, and your might knows no bounds. May you live forever and ever." What a blatant attempt at flattery. Those who heard it felt their scalps tingle. Just how shameless was Zhu Honggong that he was able to utter such words without a change in his expression. Lu Zhou was pleased when he saw Zhu Honggong's loyalty rising. Zhu Honggong left the cave of reflection and walked to the other side. Lu Zhou looked at Yu Shongrong. Name, Yu Shongrong. Identity, nobleman, human or realm, nascent divinity, tribulation realm, restricted. These were the information he gleaned when he first met Yu Shongrong. He was neither intrigued nor shocked by this. Yu Shongrong was weirded out by Lu Zhou's gaze. He lowered his head and said, "Master." Lu Zhou faced Yu Shongrong and did something shocking. He cupped his fists at Yu Shongrong and said, "I'm not worthy." Yu Shongrong was astonished. Yu Shongrong had never seen his master bow to anyone, ever. All these years, his master had been an existence that was lofty and looked down on all other life forms from above. Why was his master saying such words? His master's words genuinely startled him. He immediately fell to one knee and rested his fists on the ground. His eyes were fixed on the ground as well. Although he felt much pride having his master salute him, he did not think he could take it. Lu Zhou did not move. He looked at Yu Shongrong, who had fallen to one knee, as he stroked his beard and said, "Sometimes, unneeded pride will only hurt you." "It's in a sword's nature to be cold and arrogant," Yu Shongrong replied. His eyes were still trained on the ground. "Overconfidence is no different from being conceited, and conceit will blind you. Do you really think your sword skills are peerless?" Lu Zhou asked tonelessly. "I don't dare claim that," Yu Shongrong replied in a low voice. "No, you do." Lu Zhou raised his voice. When Lu Zhou raised his voice, they felt their hearts tightened. They did not even dare to breathe heavily. They were wondering how this great villain would discipline this disciple. They were curious about how he was going to discipline this genius swordsman. "I dare not," Yu Shongrong said in a low voice again. "Stand up and speak." Yu Shongrong was slightly stunned. Based on his master's previous temper, he should have been heavily punished. Why did his master suddenly change? He suddenly remembered what his 7th junior brother said. There were 100 questions in his mind at this moment. He slowly rose to his feet. Lu Zhou said, "Bring your sword here." He did not wish to use unnamed. He kept his right hand raised and waited for the sword. The others exchanged glances. Zhou Jifeng was the only elite here who used a sword. If he did not even have a small amount of tact, he would have spent his time here in vain. He quickly drew his sword and placed it in Lu Zhou's hand. Lu Zhou raised the sword. The sunlight glinted off the blade. "Since you call me your master, I want to see how much my disciple has improved." Yu Shongrong had a frightened expression on his face. He did not dare to unsheath his longevity sword. When Lu Zhou saw Yu Shongrong remained motionless, he cried out before he thrust the sword forward. He did not use his primal qi. His sword moved nimbly like a dancing dragon. Perhaps, it was due to the sword's poor material, it seemed a bit brittle when Lu Zhou wielded it. However, it did not detract one from seeing how complicated and unpredictable his movements were. Yu Shongrong's expression grew darker. He could underestimate everyone but not his master. He had instantly recognized his master's move. It was a skill from the Guiyuan sword technique, the technique he was most skilled in. Retreat. Quickly retreat. He reached for his longevity sword and swung it. There was only one possible outcome from the clash between a heaven-grade weapon and a lesser weapon. Swoosh. Lu Zhou's sword vibrated vertically and dodged the longevity sword at a peculiar angle. He loosened his grip. Charge. He sent the sword flying. Bam. It was pinned onto the wall behind Yu Shongrong, barely half an inch from his neck. One move. His master had only used one move to defeat him. The entire process took no longer than a few breaths. The magnitude of the difference between them was unimaginable. Yu Shangrong had difficulty accepting this. His fingers tightened around the longevity sword. His knuckles whitened. Defeating Yu Shangrong with the sword meant crushing Yu Shangrong's pride. There was nothing more effective than this. This was Lu Zhou's objective all along. Hua Wudao nodded as he said, in terms of experience, the pavilion master is clearly superior. In terms of technique, it seems like the pavilion master is more powerful as well. Mr. Second relies too much on his longevity sword. He thought that he could break the weapon, but he was wrong. Lang Luo said, that's not all. One has to be able to defy conventions with one's weapon. A sword isn't only a sword. At appropriate times, it can be a saber or a hidden weapon. Lu Zhou had used the sword as a hidden weapon by tossing it out. The problem was most cultivators controlled their weapons with primal qi. Hence, there was practically no chance for them to encounter such a situation. Indeed, Yu Shangrong had many combat experiences. He was no stranger to life or death battles. The only experience he lacked was fights of this kind. It was only normal that he was defeated. After defeating Yu Shangrong, Lu Zhou placed his hands on his back and asked, "Is this your sword path?" Yu Shangrong could not speak. He felt the attack earlier was full of openings. He had hundreds, even thousands of ways to parry it, and yet, he chose the dumbest way. He knew that he would lose, but he never thought that he would lose in such a simple manner. His master was old and was using a crude weapon. However, his master had easily bested him even though he was in prime and was wielding the longevity sword. His master's skills were clearly superior to his. Zhu Honggong exclaimed excitedly, "Your might knows no bounds, master. Your sword skills are unmatched." The years, before he could finish his sentence, he felt the peculiar stares from the crowd. They looked at him as though he was a fool. Yu Shangrong cupped his fists and said, "You're right, master." Ding. Disciplined Yu Shangrong. Reward 500 merit points. The reward was clearly higher than what Lu Zhou received from the other disciples. Lu Zhou could not be blamed. Yu Shangrong was, indeed, too proud. He looked at the longevity sword and asked, "When did you attain the 8-leaf stage?" "I don't remember." Yu Shangrong gave it some thought before he said, "Almost a century, I think." The others were shocked upon hearing this. Yu Shangrong looked so young. The others were beside themselves with envy and admiration. Then, they looked at the members of the old age pavilion. Sigh. Constantly comparing oneself to others would only make one angry. Hua Wudao felt most ashamed. In terms of appearance, he looked much older than Lang Luo and Pan Litian. However, he was only at the 7-leaf stage. The 8-leaf stage seemed like an unattainable goal to him at the present. The others in the outside world said that the 9 disciples of the Evil Sky Pavilion were amazingly talented. It seemed like it was true. They were reminded of the eccentric Miss Ninth, Little Yuan. She had only joined the pavilion less than 6 years ago. However, based on her progress, she would probably surpass her seniors in no time at all and become the strongest among them. Lu Zhou stroked his beard. He looked at Yu Shangrong. "Why aren't you at the 9-leaf stage?" He had asked this question after giving it considerable thought. With Yu Shangrong's talent, given 100 years, he should have attained the 9-leaf stage. Yu Shangrong replied, "I want to live." Lu Zhou remembered Gong Yuandu's words. He mused, Yu Shangrong and Yu Zhenghai are both 8-leaf experts. Perhaps, they made the same decision. The death of Jing Yan from Cloudshine Nunnery was a testament to how treacherous the 9-leaf stage was. The 9-leaf stage drains a person's life. Are you deliberately suppressing your cultivation base like Yu Zhenghai? Lu Zhou stared at Yu Shangrong. When Yu Shangrong heard this, he shook his head helplessly and said, "There's no one in this world that can overcome the great limit. The 9-leaf stage is nothing but a taboo set by the firmaments. Anyone who tries to break the taboo will have to pay with their lives." I knew this from the day I joined the pavilion. Master, why do you insist on stubbornly pursuing it? The others were shocked. Lu Zhou was the only one who knew that he was only in the Tao transforming divine court realm. However, in the eyes of the others, Lu Zhou was a bona fide nascent divinity tribulation realm expert with an 8-leaf golden lotus. It was only natural for him to pursue the 9-leaf stage after all. These words. It sounded like the disciple was trying to dissuade his master from doing something futile. Why would anyone challenge the truth? Lu Zhou frowned. Have I ever asked for your feedback regarding my actions? This disciple dares not. Yu Shangrong addressed himself as a disciple again. Men, Lu Zhou said. Pan Zhong and Zhou Jifeng stepped forward. Take the longevity sword away. Lu Zhou said. Pan Zhong and Zhou Jifeng were speechless. Of the people gathered there, the two of them did not have high statuses, and they were young. Hence, it was only natural for them to carry out menial tasks. However, asking them to offend Yu Shangrong. Was this not akin to asking them to forfeit their lives?